You have just tuned in for the latest transmission of Stranger Than Fiction. And on today's show, I am joined by Ammon Bundy. Some of you may be familiar with him as the son of rancher Cliven Bundy from the 2014 Bundy standoff, but he is also the founder of peoplesrights.org and so much more. But before we get into it, if this just happens to be your first time ever watching any of my videos, I do encourage you to check out and explore my channel. Make sure you're subscribed, smash that like button, and hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date with my videos as they come out. I encourage everyone to check out my Patreon channel where I post up exclusive content, you get early access to videos, and it's a way to support the channel directly. Be sure you're following me on Library and Odyssey where I have backups of all of my videos and post up extra content. And check out Rice Radio, that is hosted on Anchor.fm. It's available on every major podcasting platform at Rice Radio, with new episodes coming out weekly. And in case you don't know, I am partnered up with Money Metals Exchange. And that means you can get a free half ounce of silver. All you need to do is go to moneymetals.com, be a first-time buyer, purchase $100 or more, use the promo code RICE, R-I-C-E, you get a free half ounce of silver, and it's an additional way to support the channel as well. I'm going to have links down below for everything I just mentioned, as well as everything we talk about on today's show. All right, ladies and gentlemen, joining me on today's show is Ammon Bundy. Ammon, I really appreciate you accepting my invitation to come on today. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you again for accepting my invitation. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You're kind of an interesting person over there, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you a little bit better and discovering a little bit more about what you're doing. Some people may be familiar with you as the son of the rancher Cliven Bundy, who is a central figure in the 2014 Bundy standoff. You also gained some attention leading the 2016 occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. And I read something about you being arrested twice in 2020 at the Idaho State Capitol in regards to being at the Capitol in regards to some mask legislation and COVID legislation. And I've been hearing about this people's rights thing. Before we get into all that, in your words, who is Ammon Bundy?
Well, mostly just I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm the third son of Cliven Bundy. I grew up on a ranch in southern Nevada. Had a fleet maintenance business for 21 years, taking care of commercial trucks. And, so that's basically who I am. I never thought in any fashion that I would ever be pushed into the political light of, in this country, or trying to do my best to defend freedom and liberty. But that's certainly what has happened. And so, I guess where much is given, much is expected. And also, I feel like, if I have the ability to make a difference, that I should do it. And so that's all I've been doing. I guess in a nutshell, I've got, my wife's name is Lisa. I've got 6 kids, 3 boys, 3 girls. My oldest is 18. My youngest is 6 years old, just turned 6. So I'm right in the middle of raising a family and, loving that and enjoying that. So that's basically who I am.
Well, you're a busy guy, man. And I appreciate everything that I know that you've done. From what I understand, you're basically doing what you feel is your duty. You're standing up for things that you feel are wrong. And we'll get into that because this is something that really has something to do with the duty of all people who consider themselves to be Americans. When our checks and balance system is broken, it is our responsibility to pick that up and to check the government and put it back into balance. So let me see where we start off. I want to go ahead and do a quick screen share so people know that you have a YouTube channel, because I want people to make sure they're checking out your YouTube channel as well. A lot of good information on here. And also I was just doing a little research. Wikipedia doesn't seem to be too fond of you. And the same information
And
came up on Facebook. I was doing a search for your name on Facebook, and there was a little fact check thing right underneath your name that gives this information from Wikipedia, basically talking about you being some sort of anti-government militant.
well, it's funny because even factually, the statements on there are factually incorrect. But anyway,
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I could hire someone to go into Wikipedia and probably do that. But a lot of this, negative media actually has been a great blessing to myself, to my family, and even to the People's Rights Network. Uh, and just because at first glance, just looking at the headlines or what Wikipedia is saying, we look like these crazy, you know, criminals, really. And what people do is they look at that and they go, "Oh my goodness!" And the ones that only go no further than a headline, that's all they'll end. And the others will dig deeper, and then they'll find out that the media is absolutely lying. That we're, a good family. That we're all family people, and we love our country. We were just ranchers in the Southern Nevada desert. That the government came and tried to take our ranch and attacked us, and then they become like completely like um, connected to it, and they realize that there might be some things going on here that need to be uncovered, and they keep uncovering it, and then they become you know uh, either fighting with us to try to restore freedom, or they become a great supporter. And so it's been a great blessing to have that negative media out there kind of sifting those who wouldn't look further than a headline.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And it's also, I think, to also paint a bad light for anybody who's trying to do something that I feel is patriotic and the thing that we're supposed to do. It's almost as if now they're trying to make that a bad thing, that we want
Right.
to do what our founding fathers fought long and hard for, to be able to found this nation, and what it's turned into is not what they fought for. And it's very sad when you think about that. Before we talk about people's rights, which I definitely want to highlight, one of the things that I noticed that you stand really firm on is the fact that the federal government has not been given authority to act the way that they are. You have a video entitled "By What Authority Are They Acting?" and it's on your YouTube channel, which I'll have linked down below. So I encourage people to check that out. But let's talk a little bit about that. You also mentioned that most acts of Congress the last 50 years have not been authorized by the people. Supreme Court rules over matters that they have no jurisdiction over, forcing the states in undue obedience. How does this work versus what our founding fathers set in for the purpose of our federal government versus what the federal government has turned into and is acting as?
Yeah, to explain it, I think simple is the federal government was supposed to ultimately protect the states from the outside world. It was designed to make sure that the states stayed united, strong, and to handle the affairs of the world, so that the states can begin trading with each other. The people in the states can trade with each other freely. That they can, preserve their liberty, their property. That they could be, secure in doing that. And then the state's job was supposed to actually check and balance the federal government to make sure that they don't infringe upon the people's rights, and to keep that barrier between the federal government, keep the federal government doing what they're supposed to do, and then you get all the way down into your counties and then individuals. Well, what has happened, and kind of laying out a sequence of things without going into too much detail, is you get to 1913, and about that year they created a federal income tax and the Federal Reserve. And then they also did something that same year, which was very nefarious. And what they did is the senators, the U.S. senators, used to be voted and put in place by the state legislatures. That's what happened.
Right.
And that way, the state stayed strong in their voice when it came to the federal government. And so therefore, if the federal government ever tried to do anything, the state legislatures could vote out the senators and had control of the senators.
Exactly.
Well, what happened in 1913, the same year they passed the Federal Reserve, they also changed they actually amended the Constitution. The 16th and 17th Amendments is what I'm talking about. They actually amended the Constitution where the people voted in the senators, just like the U.S. representatives. Well, what that did is it made it so the states had no voice and control in the federal government. So from that point on, now the federal government's getting funded directly from the people, which is unconstitutional, by the way. They're getting directly funded by the people, and they're literally sucking all this money up to Washington, D.C. And then they destroyed the checks and balances that the state had in place, or that the Constitution put in place for the states.
Right.
And so they just began to now use that money and trickle it down to the states and make them completely obedient. And the founders called it undue obedience, because they have to be obedient in order to, do the things they need to do as a state, because the federal government is basically passing laws and also trickling money down. And that's basically what's happened to this COVID thing. And so this check and balance that was set up, these wonderful, really wise check and balances that were set up by our founders, have been destroyed, and we've become more of a subsidiary of a central government. The states have, and the counties have too, because the counties rely on and get the funding from the federal government, which was never designed to be that way.
Right.
But and you could bet that the federal government doesn't give any type of funding unless it comes with a contract, what they call a memorandum of understanding, or an MOU, which means if they take money from the federal government, then basically they're beholden to them. And so that is why your counties, even your county sheriffs, your municipalities, your states, why they're all following the same tune. And it's because it's coming from the same place, which is the federal government.
I agree. And the purpose, when the founding fathers created the federal government, it was very specific with that the authority it was given. It was limited authority to the federal government. It was only enough power to perform the specific duties of basically involving in foreign trade, disputes between two or more states, which would be your appeals courts, national defense against other nations, and growth and expansion of the country. And it definitely got a lot more out of hand from there. Have you ever researched the idea that, based off the Act of 1871 and a little bit more information, that there has been kind of a corporate takeover of our de jure nation by a de facto government?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that sounds, fantastic when you say that, but that's the reality. I mean, after World War II, 14th Amendment, the United States incorporated, the other states incorporated as subsidiaries, charters underneath the federal government. All the banks are now chartered underneath the federal government. All of it is done through a corporate structure. And people might say, "Oh, you're crazy for saying that." Well, it's just the fact. It's not like I'm saying one way or the other because I believe something. It's a fact.
It is.
You can't go get a bank account and go try. Anybody go try. Go get a bank account without a social security number or an EIN number, which is employee identification number. You can't do that. And the reason why is because the bank cannot register you with the federal government.
Right.
Because they are charters. They're a charter.
The camera. Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
I got a phone call.
No problem.
Sorry about that. I got a phone call. So they're chartered under the federal government, under the corporation of the United States of America. It was never supposed to be designed that way. The government was supposed to be something that wasn't a corporation. It was supposed to be something that the power that came from the people, and the people gave them enumerated powers to do specific things. It was never supposed to be its own entity. It was never supposed to be an entity at all other than to fulfill a purpose. And it's caused a tremendous amount of trouble because every corporation, every business is also chartered under that main corporation, which is the United States of America. was never designed to be a hierarchy of this main corporation with all these little sub corporations underneath it. It was supposed to be the other way around, where the people were the one who were sovereign, and that this entity or this purpose of government was just to protect the sovereignty of the individual.
Love it, dude. And we're going to come back to this. We're definitely going to come back to this because there's some things I want to talk about in regards to the whole corporation and the idea that we as Americans, we were supposed to be sovereign people, meaning that we were self-governing, not sovereign over any other individual. We were sovereign over ourselves to be accountable and self-governing, which is a beautiful thing. A lot of people lately have been talking about the Constitution, and it is a cool document. I'm not going to try to dismiss it, but to me, it seems like the Declaration of Independence and then the amendments, the Bill of Rights, are the things that apply to we, the people. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think I do, because what the Constitution was trying to do was to set up a system of unity among the people through, a central government, state governments, and so forth. And it was set up to protect the individual's rights that are talked about in the Declaration of Independence, and it so the Declaration of Independence is a founding document. It's even more of a founding document than the Constitution. The Constitution was more like the application to protect these rights, right? The Declaration is actually a declaration of those rights, that they come from God, that they're unalienable, meaning man doesn't have a right to take them away, and if he does, then God will hold him accountable. That's what those mean, and it also lays the foundation that if whatever form of government is established stops producing or protecting those rights, that the people have the right to set up new guards and to basically organize themselves in a way that they can protect these rights. And unfortunately, that is where we're at. And unfortunately, that has been the history of this world, that all institutions deteriorate. They deteriorate to become corrupted until they either destroy themselves or they begin functioning opposite from the purpose in which they were designed. And I use this as an example, like Sears and Roebuck. I mean, when you talk to somebody who's, 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, I mean, if you would have talked to them, 40, 50 years ago, or even 100 years ago, Sears and Roebuck, they would have never believed that it would have gone out of business.
No, yeah, it was like,
I mean,
it was as American as apple pie. Because me and you are the same age, both born in '75, so we're at the tail end of the Sears catalog years.
That's correct. I mean, there was a time where almost everything was purchased through Sears and Roebuck, and when you were done with the Sears and Roebuck and got the book catalog and you got the new one, you used it as toilet paper. I mean, it was what the American people used. And 50, 60, 70 years ago, to think that Sears and Roebuck would go out of business, and that in 2021 that people wouldn't even know what Sears and Roebuck was, would be almost unbelievable to those people. But the reality is that even that organization deteriorated to the point where it couldn't even pay its own bills and had to go bankrupt. And so that's what happens to all institutions in this world. I don't understand it. I didn't make the rules, but our government now is deteriorating to the point where, it is now the actual primary taker of rights and fringer of rights rather than the protector. And over 2020, I think the states have shown their true colors as well, that they are going to basically be beholden to the federal government and do as the federal government requires in order to get funding. And that is an infringement upon rights.
I would definitely agree. And I know, you're kind of limited with time. So I hope that we can have more conversations, because there's a lot of things I'd like to be able to cover in future conversations and future episodes. But what I guess I would like to turn the table to is finding out a little bit more about, before we get into people's rights. You spend some time in prison. You've been involved in a public light. You've got 6 children. You're married. you seem to have a really nice life. Why did you decide to continue to stand up for things that you feel are wrong when you could just be sitting at home trying to be a father and husband and just live life? Why are you doing this?
Well, I wish I would have never ever read a book or ever picked up the Constitution or ever, because I have been a student, just really always interested in history, world history, US history. It's something that, I don't know, just has always interested me. Well, the problem is when you read and then start to understand and unwind world history and even U.S. history, but particularly world history, and you start getting into, many of the things that would happen in the the Old Testament era, and then you start getting into the medieval times and so forth, and you begin to see what happens. There's a pattern. There's a pattern, and basically, there's always this power struggle of who is going to rule, and who has the right to rule, and uh, and when you might get like say a king that's benevolent, and the people they get a little bit of relief or not for a little bit because they have a benevolent king, or you might get a king in that's tyrannical, and then the people suffer. But the problem is that it's not so much that whether it's a good king or a bad king. It's the problem is that you have a king, and and what our founders did in this country, which was amazing and a great miracle, is they basically erased the king, and they said every person is a king, and every person can have their property. They can have their own little kingdom. They can have their own little castle that they call their house. It might be just a log, basically a one-room log home, but it is their castle, and they own it. And that's what the American dream was. I mean, we're kind of led to believe that the American dream was that they could come to America and get prosperous and own all these things, which is part of it. But the American dream was back really when people were coming to America was that they can own property,
Yeah.
that it was actually theirs, that it didn't belong to the king or the lords. It belonged to that person. And so when I see all this, and then I see the terrible things that a king or a lord or a ruler will do to other people, and believe it's completely their right, and then how it's tied to the right to own property, the right to decide what you're going to do with your body, the right to believe and act according to your conscience. And when I see that deteriorating back to this power struggle of who has the right to rule, I think, what am I going to pass on to my children? Like, I can't pass on the history that we've already gone through to my children, especially after we came to this point of freedom and liberty and individual sovereignty, the right to rule themselves. We can't just let that go. We have got to fight for it. We've got to, pass it on to our children. We've got to teach our children that they have to fight for it and hang on to that, because we are literally we are losing it right now, and which is why I felt like we needed to gather and unite the people that understand these things and do our best to stand and preserve this great American dream.
I love it, man. And I kind of figured that was how you would answer the question, but these are the kind of things that I feel like other people need to hear. It's the time to wake up, and it's a time for us to unite and stand together. And those are very inspirational words, and I appreciate you sharing that.
Let me make it a little real, if I can, for just maybe your listeners. And because right now, you walk out and almost everywhere you go, someone's wearing a mask, and they think, oh, it's for, they've been told and believe, and it's the lie that it's for this, it's brotherly love, and it's for the safety of themselves and the safety of their neighbors,
Right.
which factually that's not necessarily true. But I ask the question, and I bring this up because the problem with wearing a mask is that it has been done by mandate. And basically what the government has said is that we have a right to force you to wear a mask. So we have the right to rule over your body. And the problem with wearing the mask is you're conceding to that. And you are allowing wicked, wicked people who will use this power to do terrible things. You are allowing them to believe that they have a right to control your body. And that is the danger of it. So you have to ask yourself, what is more dangerous? Me wearing a mask, or me not wearing a mask, let's say that, or me wearing a mask and allowing the wrong people to believe that they have a right to rule. And this path, I mean, has gone down before. And we always use the example of, Germany, of Hitler and the Jews and so forth. And I'm going to use it again because I think it's appropriate. It's certainly not the only example. But what happened is they allowed the Jews and the people of Germany, allowed the government to believe that they had a right to control certain parts of people's aspects of people's lives that they didn't have a right to control.
Right.
And that perpetuated into, youth sterilization, concentration camps. Basically, they had a right to put a certain type of people into camps, that they had a right to sterilize those certain type of people. And then it evolved into, or devolved into, to actually euthanizing these people. And because the German government, Hitler, did it all legally. It was all legal. Every bit of it was passed through Congress, and he had the power and authority to do it according.
Got another call?
Yeah, sorry about that. He had
You're
the power
a busy
and authority
guy.
to do it according to law. According to law, yeah, he did it legally. But so the question is, I mean, are you going to risk allowing a government, a people, you can say government or people, doesn't matter. You're going to allow you're going to risk them believing that they have a right to control you and your children and your body and your job and your entire life? Or are you going to answer that question? That's why I feel, very strongly that I will never, ever, and should never, ever wear a mask.
I love it, dude. I love it. And I mean, obviously, you went to that state capitol in Idaho in regards to the protests for the mask and for the COVID legislation. So, I mean, I could see where you're being outspoken towards this. Let's get into people's rights. Is this something that you started, or was this founded by somebody else and you just became a part of it?
No, it's something I started. It was a pattern that I saw many years ago that needed to be followed in order to preserve liberty. I could give you a history of that, and then, I tried to, I've tried multiple times to, not be so politically active, if you will, because it is difficult. It's hard on your family and so forth to constantly be in the light. But so I was trying to keep on the down low, and then COVID hit, and I began to see, like the governor and other governors start to follow this pattern of wanting to control and taking control of other people's rights. And so I was motivated to, start this network. It's a network, and people get it confused as an organization. There is no hierarchy. We created the People's Rights System so that local people in their area can use the tools that are available to them through the People's Rights System, and they can connect with all their neighbors. They can communicate quickly through text messaging apps, emails, secure messages, ham radio systems, so that they can, if needed, unite together quickly to defend themselves. And it has been tremendous. We've got, almost 50,000 people that are in the network now. We were in 35 states, almost 400 areas, which is the communities, and it has been successful already in defending multiple people's rights. I'll give you a couple examples. There just recently was a lady I think she was 78-year-old lady. She had suffered a brain tumor, so she had given her medical power of attorney to her daughter. She had a UTI, urinary tract infection. She went to the hospital. They wouldn't let her leave after she refused a COVID test. And they would not let her daughter in, who had medical power of attorney, into the hospital to be with her. So the daughter called the sheriff's department. The sheriff came out and actually protected the hospital. So then she called People's Rights, and People's Rights activated the network through the People's Rights system. And within minutes, hundreds of people were on their way to the hospital, and hundreds of people were calling the hospital. And after 2 hours, the sheriff can just see that it was just going to escalate more and more. The hospital could see that more and more people were coming. We activated 6,051 people, and
Wow.
to become active in that local area. And we're just overwhelming the hospital with phone calls and the sheriff's office, and people were coming, and they just decided this isn't worth it, and they released the lady and let her go back to her daughter. um,
Yeah,
we have many examples.
I saw something about that in the media that they were painting it as like basically a group of militants that were doing this, that
Oh
were
yeah,
that were
yeah.
led by the anti-government militant Ammon Bundy.
Yeah, I mean, they're just, I mean, look at the video. They're mothers and fathers and children, and we are not going to find security in our current system of government. We're not. We are
Right.
going to find security with each other, sticking together with each other. And this system, the People's Rights system, People's Rights Network, is a great tool to be able to unite neighbors. And uh, that's all it is. That's all it is. It's not a hierarchy. It's not me pulling the strings, being a puppet master. It's none of that. In fact, I have no say whatsoever goes on in other areas other than I'm creating these tools. I've got a development team. We're creating these tools to provide really effective, quick ways to communicate with each other and to unite with each other in your local areas. And then we provide somewhat of an outline and a standard and the best ways to do that. But how the local people use these tools, as long as they're used for freedom, is really up to them.
I love it. I love it. And if somebody's interested in joining this network, how would they go about doing it? I did share
So
the link, and I will share it for
yeah,
peoplesrights.org.
there's two ways. And remember, when they're joining with their local neighbors. They're not joining in this. I mean, yeah, they become part of the People's Rights system, which there's 50,000 people in it, but they're actually joining with their local, community. And the way to do that is text rights to 80123, or go to peoplesrights.org and join there. Yeah, so you could just take your phone and text rights to 80123. It'll send a message to you, and it'll guide you through the way to get connected. And then once you're there, you can, like, what happens is in a local area, there's 3 to 5 local people that have said, hey, we will make sure that this system is used and taken care of properly. And they become the gatekeepers of everybody else's information. So it's not like when you go and join, everybody, your information now is available to everybody in your area. That's not the way it goes. It's only available to 3 to 5 people that have been put in place because they're trusted gatekeepers. And then let's say you're in trouble and you need something. Let's say you were the lady at the hospital. Well, then you could contact through a very quick process. You actually type an SOS back to the People's Rights number, and it'll immediately contact the area assistance, which is those 3 to 5 people, and then they will activate all the rest of the people to come to your defense. And that's the way it works. And it's a very responsible, very secure, very I wouldn't say fell proof, because nothing's fell proof, but it's got all the pieces in place to really work the way it's supposed to, and it's worked all over the country already. It's been absolutely amazing. And those who want to take rights, those who are trying to claim rights as the people's rights as their own, have absolutely tried to demonize this, and will continue. And they've tried to destroy it. They've completely taken us off all social media platforms. You can't even type in people's rights into the Facebook Messenger without it warning you. And we just recently got censored from the SMS carriers, the texting carriers. And so we had to completely do a whole new developing, and we just made it live actually today, where we're doing all our messaging now through Signal, because they're not censoring and because they're encrypted. So that's going to be a really great thing. And we're that they're just transporting that message from, the people's rights systems to the individual people's phones. And we're working on some really awesome, secure messaging and we've already used and been great, and ham radio networks. Um, and
You
yeah,
looked at
it's amazing.
have you looked into anything blockchain related for any of this because of the
We
anti-censorship? That's one of my
we
areas. Like
have
I'd love to
yeah
help
we
help out
have
and suggest some things to you, privately.
we have and we're actually doing research right now, because we're not going to like we're not going to eliminate any type of communication, right? We just The idea is to have this network and have a way in which we communicate, but then duplicate it,
Right.
so we have tons of redundancy. So, if we could get a blockchain communication going, yes.
Okay.
Signal, yes. We're still going to use SMS as we can,
Yeah.
yes. We've got our secured, we got emails, we got ham, all these things, if we can figure out a really great way to do smoke signals, we'll do it, because communication is the first line of defense. And they know that they have to isolate the people and keep them from being able to communicate with each other, or they're in trouble. Because when
Yeah.
people start being able to activate and communicate and unite, I mean, you're
Well,
talking about, a 300 million man army.
well, what I say, I mean, I say it in my videos all the time. It's so simple, but it's hard to get to that point. But it's a simple concept. When enough people take a stand, nothing can stand against the people.
That's exactly right.
So we just
Yep.
got to get
And
through. We got to get through all this division, things like people's rights that are building these networks. One of the last things I wanted to ask you in this particular conversation was, since in a touchback on is corporations idea of us being sovereign individuals unto ourselves, self-governing. When you said unalienable rights, when you look at things from a corporate perspective and the sub corporations and what's happened to the United States, some people also call these unalienable rights because of the fact that people say that we are bonded surety. So it's kind of a double play on words, because I've noticed etymology, if you've been studying history, definitions of words are obviously, when you look at law definitions versus common people talk, it's not the same. So have you researched or checked into any of these groups that are that are forming, trying to do like what Thomas Jefferson said in the Declaration of Independence, the right to abolish and rebuild a government that's for, of, and by the people? I'm not going to name any particular organizations. We could talk about stuff privately or in future episodes, but there are groups that are trying to form new governments, people that are talking about changing their status from a US citizen to something to the effect of an American citizen or state citizen or state national. I've even heard of private membership associations with status changes as well. Have you researched any of these things, and are you involved in any of this stuff? Have you changed your status, or is it something you're considering?
So I haven't changed my set status. I I'm not sure that I'm considering it, because I've always said, hey, these are my rights. And just because someone might have come up with this really slick way to try to claim my rights, I've never relinquished them. They're mine. They came from God. And I don't need necessarily change my status somewhere to somehow, you know, make where I have more or less rights. However, I will say this: I have been approached by, I want to say hundreds, but maybe that's an over exaggeration, but of these groups that understand the sovereignty. And I will say this, that most of them, in most ways, are correct. Their actual research and understanding and the principles in which they're trying to, lay the foundation that they're doing is correct. And I believe most of them, in the way that they're doing, they have every right to do it. For example, the Declaration says we do have a right to set up new guards. However, this has been the key piece that I've seen missing from every one of them,
Okay.
and that is they have no system to secure it, to actually enforce it. They have no way to actually defend and protect it. They want to build up this, you know, secondary side by side or paralleled, system of justice, and then somehow rely on the current enforcement power to enforce it. And that's never going to happen. The people actually have to unite and physically enforce the administration of justice or enforce their own defense. They have to in order for any of these things to work, whether it's common law courts, whether it's whether it's declaring themselves as a sovereign citizen, that the government they would actually use that term.
Yeah, I know that's yeah. I was gonna say that's a
so
word we don't like to use.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't have used that because
it's okay.
Completely oxymoron. I was just giving you the picture, whatever it is that they're doing, whether they're creating, committees of defense, committees of correspondence, committees of justice, whatever they're doing. If it doesn't have an enforcement side, it doesn't work, because the wicked only react to one thing, and that is fear. They only act, fear and power, I guess. So the two things, if they can get power, but as soon as they are afraid that they're going to lose power or that they're going to be personally accountable, then all of a sudden they start changing their tune and changing their direction. And so you have to, and that's why, the Second Amendment isn't just about bearing arms. The second line in the Second Amendment says, in order to secure a free state, you have to have a well-regulated militia. And well, what was that all about? The founders knew that the people had to be, armed and had to be organized in a way that if the government got out of hand, that the people could check and put them back in. And I'll give you an example of this if you want.
Yeah.
So when the Constitution was first drafted, most of the states would not ratify it because they felt like it established a centralized government that was a lot like what they just got free from 11 years earlier.
Yeah, Virginia and Pennsylvania, I think, were two of the most opposing states.
Yeah, New York was up there. They really opposed the Constitution. Well, the promoters of the Constitution, this is all in the writings of the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers. So the promoters of the Constitution, the one who thought that having a central government that was very limited was a really good thing, they said, look, if the federal government, the central government that we're trying to create through the Constitution, if it was ever got out of hand, it would be ludicrous to think that the people wouldn't check and put it back in balance. So they used the militias. They said the militias would always put the government back in check. So go ahead and let's create the central government, because the people and the militias would always check and balance the federal government.
Right.
Well, the problem is we know through a succession of our militias, and you do a history, well, the militia eventually was turned into the National Guard, if you will. And the people forgot that there was supposed to be an organized and unorganized militia. And now the National Guard is in control of this by the same people who would infringe upon the rights of the people in many, many aspects. So we have lost the militia and the purpose of the militia.
Yeah.
So therefore, the unorganized militias, which are actually part of the U.S. Code, are the ones who need to be formed and organized in order to check and balance basically the rest of the government.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree 100%. And, and again, I'd like to fill you in privately about some of these organizations and what some of them are doing, because there are some that are trying to put this enforcement arm into effect. It's just, I think also you need numbers. If you don't have enough people, then obviously it's going to be hard for the people to stand. But okay, well, I guess we're kind of running on the allotted time that you've given me today, which I really honestly appreciate. Again, do you have any final thoughts or anything you want to add to this conversation?
Well, the only thing I could say is that through all of this, experience that I've had with, I've been falsely incarcerated for 2 years. I was found not guilty by a jury. One jury, they still wouldn't release me. They sent me down to Nevada with my entire family, my father and brothers and many others. We were incarcerated in federal detention centers for 2 years. In 2017, I spent more time in solitary confinement than I did out. And they basically were putting a tremendous amount of pressure on us to try to get us to take a plea because they knew we were not guilty. And ultimately, they had to release us and dismiss all the charges against us because it was just a lie. Um, and then everything that happened with my father in 2014, what happened with the Hammond family and in Oregon, I have learned, and just kind of summing this all up, that rights are not protected or secured in the courts. They're not protected or secured in the ballot box. And in fact, many times that's where they're taken. And so rights are secured on the premise in which they were established. And in order to maintain rights, you have to claim them, and use them, and defend them. And you have to do all three, or you will lose it. You have to say, this is my right. It is my right to choose what I put over my face. And I am going to exercise that right, meaning I'm going to go out and not put something over my face because it's my right. And then if someone comes to try to infringe that right, you have to defend it. And the level of defense depends upon you. It depends on how much that right means to you. But that is the way rights are secured, the way rights are maintained by a claiming them, using them, and defending them. And it has always been that way. It's never changed. This belief that our rights are secured at a Capitol building, that's a red herring. This belief that our rights are secured in the courtrooms, that also is a belief that is incorrect. And I could go into great detail on that. But unless you claim, use, and defend your rights, you will lose them. You have to do all three. It is a requirement of natural law.
So well said. And I'm glad that you ended it with natural law. Natural law is something that I've been trying to teach people a little bit more about, especially because people are talking a lot about common law, and common law is something that is of man. Natural law is something that just is. So
That's correct.
People need to know what is versus what man created. Ammon, I really appreciate your time. If you could bear with me, I'm going to do the closing stuff and stop the video and talk to you for 1 second. Ladies and gentlemen, again,
Absolutely.
I do appreciate you tuning in. Ammon, I appreciate your time. I'm going to have links down below for the People's Rights website, also for Ammon Bundy's YouTube channel, which I encourage you to check out and subscribe to as well. Again, links are going to be down below. If this is your first time ever watching any of my videos, I do encourage you to check out and explore my channel. Make sure you subscribe, hit that like button, hit the notification bell so you can stay up to date with my videos as they come out. And as always, I encourage you to be the change by practicing change.